We used to think these places were empty, just jungle or hills, but now there's this tool, LiDAR. It lets you see through the canopy, and it's showing something else. Entire cities, hidden under there for centuries, networks of them. It's making historians, they're having to rewrite things. The old story isn't working. Because the map is getting crowded, more crowded than we knew, more ingenious. There were places in the Amazon, their scale, it was like Rome, and in Cambodia, these cities with water systems. Complex systems, we're still figuring out how they worked. It's not just finding ruins, it's asking what a city even is. It's asking where urban life really started. So the question changes, what does a lost city look like? It looks like a forest until you see it. That green blanket isn't solid, it's a veil, and the tool that lifts it is a kind of remote vision. The technology is called light detection and ranging. It's like a digital sonar, but with light. You have a sensor on a plane or a drone. It sends down a constant pulse of laser beams. Millions of them every second. Each one hits something, a leaf, a branch, the ground, and it bounces back. The sensor measures how long that trip takes. And by processing all those millions of return trips, a computer builds a map, a staggeringly detailed, three-dimensional map of the surface. The magic is in the filtering. The software can be told to strip away every signal that came from vegetation, to leave only the points that hit the solid earth. What's left is a ghost image of the ground. As if every tree and vine had been digitally erased, and suddenly, what looked like wild jungle reveals itself as a carefully engineered landscape. A straight line becomes a causeway. A subtle mound resolves into a temple platform. A grid pattern emerges, showing the outlines of homes and plazas. This isn't just finding one hidden pyramid. It's seeing the entire city all at once, its streets and canals and neighborhoods laid bare in a single sweep. Archaeologist Thomas Garrison has described this as a complete paradigm shift. Before, archaeology was often a story of slow excavation. You could spend years uncovering a single palace. LiDAR gives you the entire metropolitan area in an afternoon of flying. It moves the work from the trowel to the tablet, from digging in the dirt to analyzing vast digital maps. That shift is what lets us grasp the scale. We're no longer looking at isolated ruins. We're seeing the urban fabric, the connective tissue of an ancient civilization, patterns of life that had been completely invisible for centuries. It is, in every sense, a time machine. It offers a view not of objects but of a world. Stone was never the only way to build a world, but for a long time that's how the story got told. Because what lasted was stone, granite, marble, limestone, the pyramids, the Parthenon, the Forum. Those became the archetype, the grand, the monumental, the permanent. And if you built with wood or earth or packed clay, you sort of faded from that story. That society could be seen as less advanced, maybe just a village that grew too large. That bias was baked right into archaeology, a field that really started with Mediterranean ruins. It was a lens that couldn't quite see cities made of softer stuff. LiDAR breaks that lens because it sees the shape of the land, not just the stone on top of it. It shows you cities where the architecture is the landscape itself. Vast networks, homes spread over miles, connected by causeways and canals, all woven together with farms and reservoirs. These were low-density urban systems. Not a dense, walled town, more like a modern suburban area, but planned, deeply planned, woven right into the ecology. The city wasn't just the spot with the big pyramid. The city was the whole engineered territory, the raised fields that grew the food, the canals that managed the water, the causeways for moving people and goods. And the ceremonial centers where people gathered. It was all one system, a living, functioning system which forces a rethink. What does urban even mean? It's not just density of buildings, it's the density of connections, of planning, of integrated function. If you sculpt your entire valley into a productive, sustainable engine for thousands of people, that's urban-scale civilization. They were managing resources on a metropolitan level, sustaining populations for centuries, even millennia, without the stone monuments we always looked for. Their monument was the harmony of their design with the world. That perspective changes a forest. It's not just a place hiding ruins. The forest becomes the ruins, the overgrown footprint of a living system. And that's exactly the kind of system we find, at a breathtaking scale, when LiDAR made its first major discovery. A place in the Amazon that rewrote the map. There's a secret in the Guatemalan jungle, in the Patain region. A team flew a plane with LiDAR in 2018. They were just trying to map some known sites, but the data came back. It showed the jungle floor stripped bare, and there was a megalopolis etched into the earth. Not a few temples, over 60,000 structures, a web of them, homes, palaces, defensive walls, and these raised white roads, causeways, linking everything. It wasn't scattered city-states, it was continuous, a low-density urban sprawl for hundreds of square miles. Think of it as a vast, integrated territory. They'd sculpted the entire jungle into a system. The maps showed massive canals, terraces, sophisticated wetland farming, almost industrial. They were farming the jungle, managing its water, turning it into a breadbasket for populations we never imagined. That one survey tore up the old estimates. They used to think a few million across the whole Maya world. This evidence points to 10 million or more, just in the central lowlands, a scale of social organization that rivals ancient empires. It suggests a political and economic integration far beyond warring city-states. And it reframes the collapse. If this was a civilization of millions, intricately connected, then its transformation wasn't a vanishing, it was a reorganization. A scaling down. The story shifts from catastrophe to resilience. The people didn't disappear, their way of organizing life changed. The jungle grew over the bones of a system. A system that operated at a scale we're only starting to fathom. This discovery didn't just add dots to a map, it connected them into a picture of a society. Its true complexity was hiding in plain sight, under that green canopy. Angkor Wat is the centerpiece. That famous stone temple, grand and intricate, is what we know. But LiDAR shows it was just the jewel in a much larger crown. The scans over Cambodia's jungles strip away the trees. They reveal a metropolis of staggering ambition. A low-density urban expanse, sprawling across nearly 1,000 square kilometers. That's larger than many modern cities. This wasn't just temples with huts around them. It was a meticulously planned civilization, water-powered. The true genius of Angkor wasn't in the stonework, it was in the soil. The Khmer engineers sculpted the entire landscape into a hydraulic grid, a vast network of canals and reservoirs and embankments, a giant man-made circulatory system for the city. Its purpose was to conquer the seasons. The monsoons brought torrential floods, the dry season brought punishing drought. The Khmer solution was to capture every drop, store it, redistribute it. At the heart were the massive barrays, reservoirs. The largest, the West Barray, is an artificial lake, 8 kilometers long, 2 kilometers wide, fed by canals that diverted water from rivers. This stored water wasn't just for drinking. It was released through channels in the dry months to irrigate vast rice paddies. It turned a region of unpredictable rainfall into a year-round agricultural powerhouse. It allowed the city to support a population. Researchers now believe it likely exceeded 1 million people. At its height, in the 1200s, that would have made Angkor one of the largest pre-industrial cities on Earth. But the city's form is what truly challenges our ideas. As researcher Damian Evans has noted, we're looking at a form of urbanism that is unique, a city without clear boundaries. Integrated into its landscape, there were no defensive walls encircling a dense core. Instead, the urban fabric was dispersed, neighborhoods of wooden homes on raised mounds, connected by causeways spread across an engineered terrain of fields and waterways. The grand stone temples were the spiritual anchors, the administrative anchors. In this vast green-gold network, this was a city that didn't fight its environment. It partnered with it. The Khmer didn't see a jungle to be cleared. They saw a hydrological puzzle to be solved. Their monument was the system itself, a system so resilient it sustained their civilization for centuries. Its eventual transformation speaks more to the stresses on such intricate systems. Over long periods, not a sudden collapse, the temples remained, but the brilliant, watery web that fed them slowly returned to the forest, until a laser's eye could see its ghostly imprint, reminding us that a city can be a living agreement with nature, and sometimes that agreement is written not in stone, but in the very shape of the earth. The idea of a pristine wilderness is a myth. For a long time, people called the Amazon a green desert. They said only small, nomadic groups could live there. The soil was too poor, the jungle was too dense. It was seen as a counterfeit paradise, beautiful but empty. Then LiDAR changed that story. In Bolivia and Brazil, the lasers looked under the canopy, and they showed a landscape that isn't wild. It's a memory of a garden. These aren't the stone cities you might think of. They're something else. Researchers call them garden cities. Picture settlements like constellations, concentric rings of mounds for homes and ceremony, and they're connected by these perfectly straight, raised roads. Causeways that run for kilometers, linking one community to the next, often with ditches and embankments around them. This was planned. It was interconnected. But the real insight is in the soil. These people were master gardeners. They practiced agroforestry. They didn't clear the jungle. They curated it. They planted orchards. They created terra preta, this dark, fertile soil made from charcoal and waste over centuries. They built raised fields in the wetlands. They sculpted the forest into a food forest. So the city wasn't just the mounds and roads. The city was the entire cultivated landscape. Their homes were inside their bounty. This changes things. These societies started over 1,000 years ago. They thrived for centuries. Populations could have been in the hundreds of thousands. The scale of the earthworks alone means a high level of organization. This wasn't a wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was a managed garden, a sophisticated culture with its own way of living in the rainforest. The narrative of a virgin Amazon fades. In its place is a story of partnership, a history of humans not conquering nature but learning its rhythms, enhancing them. Their legacy is in the soil chemistry, in the patterns of the trees today. When European explorers arrived, they saw untamed jungle. They were walking through overgrown ruins of a civilization they couldn't recognize. One that challenges where we think urban life can take root. Every great city has a starting point. For Angkor, that beginning was a legend, a story about a sacred mountain city, Mahendraparvata, the mountain of the great Indra. The name was known from inscriptions. The Khmer Empire was supposed to have started there, on the Phnom Kulen Plateau. But the place itself was lost. The plateau was just wilderness, so it was a question: was it real or just a story? LiDAR gave the answer. They flew over that plateau and the lasers cut through the forest. And what they found wasn't some small outpost. It was an entire city, a planned city. A grid of city blocks and roads and temple mounds carved right into the mountain. That was Mahendraparvata, and it was more than ancient. It was a blueprint. This city was founded in the early 9th century, hundreds of years before Angkor. You can see the vision in the layout. The roads run straight north-south, east-west. The temples are placed according to sacred geography, aligned with natural features that held spiritual power. This was a city built from a cosmic plan, an early experiment, an attempt to stamp a divine order onto the land, to make a capital that mirrored the heavens. But the mountain had its own realities. The water was seasonal, the soil was thin. Supporting a big population there over the long term was a huge challenge. The very design that gave it cosmological power might have made it practically fragile, and that's why Mahendraparvata is the missing link. It shows the Khmer genius in its early form. On that mountain, they mastered urban planning. They learned how to lay out a vast, symbolic city, but they also learned the limits of the place. So when the court eventually moved down to the plains near the Great Lake, Tonle Sap, they took those lessons. They took the grand vision of a planned, sacred metropolis, but they applied it to a new, more forgiving canvas, one with abundant water. On the plains, they fused that cosmic grid with something else, the massive hydraulic engineering of Angkor. The mountain taught them how to plan a city. The plains taught them how to make it live for centuries. So urban origins aren't usually a single flash of inspiration. They're a chain of experiments, a process of adaptation. A society tries an idea in one place. It learns what works and what doesn't. Then it takes that knowledge and scales it up. It refines it. Mahendraparvata is that first, daring sketch. Angkor is the masterpiece that came after. One city couldn't exist without the lessons of the other. And both were hidden in the earth, waiting for a new kind of light to show how they were connected. The legend of the White City in Honduras. It was a story that lasted over a century. A lost city in the jungle, the city of the monkey god, white stone in the shadows, untouched, the ultimate prize for explorers, a single mythical ruin. Then they used lasers, LiDAR surveys over the Moche region, a vast wilderness. The data showed the truth. It wasn't one city, it was a constellation. A network of settlements across multiple river valleys. Each one had large plazas, pyramids, earthworks. Not one lost city, but many. A forgotten civilization completely unknown. These sites date between 1000 and 1400 CE. That's a specific window. The great Maya cities to the north were changing during that time. But these sites have a distinct character, a separate society or an offshoot of Mayan culture adapting. The evidence points to something in between. Connected but fiercely independent, their urban design has familiar ideas, ceremonial plazas, pyramid mounds, but the way they arranged communities across that rugged landscape feels entirely their own. They built in a place of incredible isolation, a true ecological borderland between major cultural spheres, and that's the profound part. For a long time, the story of cultural sophistication followed a simple map. It flowed from recognized cores, from famous heartlands, the Maya lowlands, the Valley of Mexico. The further you got from these centers, the simpler societies became. That was the thinking. The Moche cities shatter that. Here, in what we'd call the periphery, people built complex, coordinated communities. They created their own urban forms tailored to their world. It suggests innovation isn't a monopoly of the center. It can spark at the edges, in the borderlands, where different ecological zones meet, where cultural influences mingle and transform. These cities weren't provincial copies. They were original creations. Their existence forces us to redraw the map, the ancient Americas. It wasn't a landscape of a few brilliant lights surrounded by darkness. It was a tapestry of many lights, some burning brightly in places we never thought to look. The true treasure of the Moche isn't a fabled city of gold. It's the realization that human ingenuity, the drive to build community, could flourish with such power in the most unexpected corners. A city isn't just its temples. It's how it feeds itself, how it turns a landscape into a larder for tens of thousands. For the Maya city of Caracol, that transformation was total. The lasers showed a colossal machine. An engineered landscape, the ceremonial core was there, but radiating out, covering over 200 square kilometers, was this web of agricultural terraces. They sculpted the hillsides, a vast green staircase. Each terrace captured soil and water. It prevented erosion, created microclimates. This wasn't small-scale gardening. This was industrial-scale agriculture, woven right into the city, and integrated into this farmscape were the homes, tens of thousands of them, not crowded into a dense core but spread across the terraced territory. People lived within the food system. Their neighborhoods were the farm, their backyards were the fields. That integration speaks to sustainability. Caracol was designing for permanence. They weren't just extracting, they were reinvesting, building a system to last generations. The binding agent was the road system, wide, raised causeways. Some over 70 kilometers long, fanning out from the center. These weren't mere paths, they were infrastructure, highways connecting the administrative heart to the distant districts and resources. They moved people, goods, harvests from the terraces to the plazas. This network implies social cohesion, administrative control. To build and maintain the terraces, the roads, the reservoirs, that required a shared vision. Organized labor on a massive scale. Caracol was a symphony of coordinated effort. What LiDAR gives us is the complete picture. Before, archaeologists studied the Grand Plaza, the observatory. Now they see the economic engine. The city's survival depended not on conquest alone, but on this quiet mastery of the environment. It redefines power. True power was feeding your people year after year by reshaping the earth into a generous partner. The story of Caracol is a lesson written in terraces and roads, about where civilization truly takes root. Geometry at this scale, it's a language. In the upper Tapajos in the Amazon, the forest floor is speaking. LiDAR has given us a translation. And what it shows isn't the mounds of houses, it's something else. Over 450 precise shapes, circles, squares, octagons, cut right into the earth. These aren't cities, not in the way we think of them. They're ceremonial enclosures, huge ones, some over 300 meters across, with ditches and embankments forming perfect geometric patterns. And they're connected by these long, perfectly straight roads that run for kilometers through the terrain. This is a ritual landscape, a network of sacred spaces. Built between 1,500 and 500 years ago, the precision of it's breathtaking. To lay out a perfect circle or an octagon in dense rainforest. Without modern tools, that requires advanced knowledge. It implies surveyors, a shared plan, a common vision, and that vision was spread over an enormous area. These sites are distributed across hundreds of kilometers. They're not clustered around one central power. They form a web which suggests a shared tradition. A cultural or religious idea that connected communities across a vast and difficult environment. It upends the old picture, the idea of a fragmented Amazon, of small, isolated tribes in their own river valleys. This shows coordination, communication, a social fabric that was regional in scale. People were coming together from great distances to build these places. To gather there for ceremony, for exchange, to reaffirm bonds. It expands what we mean by a city. You could think of it as a distributed city. The urban functions, the gathering, the ritual, the trade, they weren't packed into one dense settlement. They were spread out across this network of specialized sites. A community might live in a dispersed village, but several times a year, they'd travel the straight road to the Great Circle. To meet others, to share news and goods and beliefs. The city, in a sense, was the network itself, the territory of connection, and these earthworks are a different kind of monument. They're not temples pointing to the heavens, they're patterns integrated into the earth. Their meaning is in their form, the circle, a universal symbol of unity of the cosmos. The square may be representing the ordered world. Their construction was an act of world-making, of imposing a sacred human order onto the wildness of the forest. It represents a society that invested its greatest effort not in palaces for an elite, but in spaces for the community, in places for coming together. That investment created a resilient social glue, one that held across a sprawling, green continent. Long after the last ceremony ended, the geometry remains. A silent testament to a connected Amazon, a civilization that expressed its unity not in a skyline, but in the very shape of the ground. Before Angkor, there was another capital. Sambor Prei, the city in the rich forest. For a long time we knew the temples, those brick towers, some of the oldest, standing in the forest. They were seen as monuments. Isolated, the seeds of something, but the question was always what was around them, and the forest floor had the answer. LiDAR surveys there, they did more than find a few more buildings. They revealed a blueprint, a complete city plan radiating out from those sacred towers. The scans show a network, canals and reservoirs. They show a clear grid. Hundreds of mounds, these were platforms, foundations for wooden homes, for palaces. All of it arranged with intention. This wasn't a village that just grew. This was a city designed from the start, engineered for living. The temples were the anchors, but the city was the system that supported them. This discovery, it's a quiet revolution. It pushes the clock back several centuries. We have evidence now, clear evidence of extensive urban planning in Southeast Asia, long before Angkor's peak. That Khmer genius for organizing space, for ceremony and daily life, it wasn't born with Angkor. It was fully formed centuries earlier, at Sambor Prei. You can see the continuity, the same principles, the integration of water management, the use of a geometric grid to order the community, the blending of the spiritual center with a lived-in landscape. This was the prototype, the first full expression of a Khmer urban vision. It reframes the story. The Khmer weren't just brilliant temple builders who later figured out how to run a city. They were master urban planners from the beginning. They understood a capital was an organism. It needed a circulatory system of water. It needed structured neighborhoods. It needed to feed its people and honor its gods within the same design. Sambor Prei was that design made real. It laid down the template, the foundational code. When the court moved to the Angkor region, they didn't start from scratch. They brought this deep knowledge of how to build a world. They scaled the principles up. They refined the water management. They amplified the grandeur. But the core idea, the sacred city as a planned, living system, it was already there. In the rich forest, waiting to show us that the roots of a megalopolis run deeper and are more deliberate than we knew. The earliest Maya story is written in stone and earth. There's a place in northern Guatemala, the Mirador Basin, a kind of hidden cradle. LiDAR technology has pulled back the forest canopy there, and it shows a foundational chapter. This was the preclassic period. We used to think of it as a simple prelude, a time before the real greatness. But the lasers show something else. They show a landscape of staggering ambition. Already fully urban, already operating on a scale that changes our old timelines. At the heart of it is El Mirador and the Ladanta Pyramid. That structure isn't just big for its time. By sheer volume, it's one of the largest pyramids ever built anywhere, and its construction started centuries before the Common Era. That fact makes you stop. To move that much earth and stone, to organize that labor, it requires a society with real centralized authority, a shared vision. This wasn't a village project. This was state-level power already in motion. But the true revelation from Mirador isn't just the individual sites, it's the connections between them. The LiDAR maps show a dense web of raised stone causeways. These white roads snake across the wetlands. They link El Mirador to its neighbor, Nakp, and then out to dozens of smaller centers. This network changed everything. It turned isolated ceremonial places into an integrated system, a political and economic unit. Goods and people and ideas moved on these paved highways. So the basin functioned not as a collection of rivals, but as a cohesive early state, a unified territory managing resources and labor across a vast area. That changes the narrative. For decades, the spotlight was on the classic period, on famous city-states like Tikal and Palenque and their dramatic rivalries. That era was seen as the peak, the climax. The Mirador evidence suggests the climax came much earlier. Right here, in the centuries before and just after the year zero, the Maya had already hit a zenith of collective effort. They built their most massive monuments. They forged a regional political system of astonishing scale. The drive toward urbanism and centralized power in this region didn't slowly evolve toward the classic period. It exploded into being, fully formed in the preclassic. So the later classic cities, for all their splendor, might represent something else, not a peak of power but a fragmentation of it. A breaking apart of that earlier, basin-wide unity into the competing kingdoms we know so well. So the Mirador Basin is a monumental prologue. It tells us that the urge to build the cosmic city, to organize society on a grand scale, is an ancient current in human history. And sometimes that current flows strongest right at the very beginning. It sets a template so ambitious that it echoes for 1,000 years. The forest here doesn't hide the ruins of a beginning. It hides the ruins of a first forgotten peak. We knew the Moche for their pyramids, the Huaca del Sol, these massive adobe temples, and we knew their pottery, these portraits in clay that feel almost alive. But now, with LiDAR, we're seeing the valleys, the spaces between the monuments, and it shows an urban landscape shaped by two things: thirst and threat. The scans across valleys like the Jequitepec show cities that were fortresses. They weren't placed casually. They were on hill slopes, on ridges, with clear sight lines over the valley floor. The data shows defensive walls snaking across the land, not just around a ceremonial center, but around entire residential districts, around agricultural terraces. Around water sources, you see bastions, strong points built at intervals along the walls. This is architecture that expects attack. It speaks to a time of real stress, where a society invested immense labor not just in celebrating gods, but in protecting people, protecting their food, and protecting their most precious resource, which was water. In that desert, water was life, and the Moche were brilliant hydraulic engineers. The LiDAR maps show the other half of the blueprint. Vast, complex irrigation canals, channels tapping rivers from the Andes, distributing that water for miles across farmland. The cities, their walls, their very locations were organized around protecting this system. A breached canal could mean starvation. A captured reservoir could mean surrender. So urban design here was a direct response, a harsh calculus. You had to secure your water to grow your food. And you needed formidable walls to secure that water from others who might want it. This moves us beyond a view of the Moche centered on ceremony and art. It shows the gritty, practical reality of their survival. Their urbanism was defensive, born from competition in a fragile place. It gives us a more nuanced view of how cities adapt. They aren't always expressions of pure prosperity or peaceful trade. Sometimes they are instruments of resilience. The Moche cities show urban life as a sustained act of holding on, of organizing society with a clear, common purpose, to endure. The elaborate pottery and the towering huacas tell us what they believed in, but the walls and the canals, visible from the air, tell us what they feared and what they fought for. It's a reminder. The origins of a city aren't always found in a vision of paradise. Sometimes they're found in the collective will to persevere. Tikal's pyramids are famous. They rise out of the canopy like stone mountains. Archaeologists have studied them for a century. They've mapped the grand plazas, the ball courts, the royal palaces. The ceremonial heart of the city is a known world, but a city is more than its heart. It has a body, a territory that feeds it, supports it. That body for Tikal was a mystery. Until LiDAR looked past the temples into the surrounding forest. The scans showed a sprawling metropolitan landscape, a gradient of human occupation, stretching for kilometers in every direction. Right outside the central precincts, you see tightly packed neighborhoods, residential compounds, small plazas, workshops. That was the dense urban core. But then, as you move outward, the pattern changes. Settlements become more dispersed. They are integrated with the land. You see individual farmsteads, clusters of homes surrounded by their own garden plots, small reservoirs, terraced fields, and all of it is connected by a network of raised causeways, smaller paths. These roads are the capillaries. They link the distant farmer to the central market. They connect the rural homestead to the ceremonies in the Grand Plaza. This wasn't a sharp line where the city ended and the wilderness began. It was a seamless continuum, a fluid, interdependent zone. The city's influence didn't stop at its last stone wall. It extended across this entire managed countryside. The people in those outlying farmsteads weren't separate from Tikal. They were part of its fabric. They paid tribute in crops. They provided labor for big projects. They took part in the city's rituals, its defense. In return, they had access to the city's goods, its protection, its community. This refines what we thought about Maya demography, economics. Earlier population estimates were often based on structured density in the core, but LiDAR shows the hinterlands were far more densely settled than anyone guessed. The city's true population, accounting for this suburban and rural sprawl, was likely much larger. It functioned like a modern metropolitan area. Think of a major city today. Downtown skyscrapers, inner suburbs, then exurbs and farmland stretching to the horizon. Tikal had a similar structure. The grand plazas were the downtown. The surrounding neighborhoods were the inner suburbs. The dispersed farmsteads were the exurbs, all linked into one system. This proves the ancient Maya city was a deeply integrated organism. Its survival depended on a symbiotic relationship between the urban core and the rural hinterland. The core provided administration, ceremony, specialized crafts. The hinterland provided the food, the raw materials, a vast reservoir of people. They managed the landscape not as separate entities, but as a single, coordinated territory. The boundary between urban and rural was not a wall. It was a conversation, a constant exchange. That exchange made the greatness of the stone pyramids possible. So when you see an image of Tikal's majestic temples, remember they are just the tip of a vast and living iceberg. A civilization whose true scale was written not only in stone, but in the quiet, enduring patterns of the forest floor. There's another monument in the Bolivian Amazon, in a place called the Llanos de Mojos. This huge, seasonally flooded savanna LiDAR has shown something. It shows a landscape that's completely human-made, but it's not a city of plazas or pyramids. It's a city of earth and water, an agricultural metropolis. Sculpted across thousands of square kilometers, what the scans show is a staggering network of raised fields, these long, rectangular platforms of soil built up above the floodplain. They're bordered by canals, and these canals aren't just ditches. They form a precise, interconnected grid, a hydraulic latticework covering an area larger than many modern nations. This was ecological engineering on a continental scale. The purpose was to conquer the rhythm of the seasons. For months, heavy rains would drown the plains. Then a long dry period would parch them. The solution was ingenious. The raised fields lifted the crops above the floodwaters. The surrounding canals served as drainage during the wet season. And in the dry season, they acted as reservoirs. The water stored in them would slowly seep into the field platforms, irrigating the crops. The canals also had another function. They were rich in nutrients. As aquatic plants decayed and fish waste accumulated, this nutrient-rich muck could be dredged up, piled onto the fields as fertilizer. It was a closed-loop, sustainable system, a perpetual motion machine for food production. This wasn't a small-scale garden project. The sheer geographic extent of these earthworks is what stuns. We're looking at one of the largest human-made landscapes in the ancient Americas. To build this, to maintain it over generations, required a society with profound organizational skill. It means large, settled populations. It means a shared plan that spanned vast distances. It means communities capable of mobilizing labor not for a single king's tomb, but for the collective good of all. The monument here wasn't a temple pointing to the gods. It was the fertile earth itself, engineered to reliably feed thousands. This discovery fundamentally repositions the Amazon. For so long, it was seen as a barrier to complex society, a place too challenging for large-scale urban life. The Beni earthworks proved the opposite. The Amazon wasn't a barrier, it was a canvas, and the societies here chose to paint with a different palette. Instead of investing in stone monuments, they invested in landscape monuments. Their genius was in intensification, in taking a challenging, dynamic environment and turning it into a predictable, abundant source of life. Their urban innovation was in the field, not the fortress. The city was the entire managed territory. The causeways that connected communities also served as dikes and walkways above the canals. Settlements were likely dispersed across this productive garden, linked by this infrastructure of water and earth. It represents a form of civilization built on a deep understanding of ecology, a partnership with water, soil, and season. It sustained populations for over 1,000 years, long before European contact. This is a heartland of early urbanism that challenges our very definition of a city, reminding us that sometimes the greatest architecture is the living landscape. Shaped by human hands to nurture life itself, there's another coastal jungle along the Gulf of Mexico in Veracruz. The vegetation there is a thick green wall. This region, it was known for the colossal stone heads, the Olmec legacy, but the centuries after that, the classic Veracruz period that was always shrouded. The jungle was too dense, the terrain was too difficult for traditional surveys. The story of urban life there was just fragments, a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Now LiDAR is providing those pieces, and it's revealing a lost urban world. The lasers cut through that coastal canopy, and beneath it they're finding not just ruins but entire planned cities. Centers of power and ceremony laid out with clear intention. You see the signature features, grand plazas for public gathering, pyramidal platforms that held temples. And everywhere the distinctive ball courts. That game was more than sport. It was a sacred ritual, a reenactment of cosmic cycles. So many courts tell us this was a central pillar of their society. But the layout of these cities, that's what captures the imagination. They're arranged in patterns that feel entirely their own. They don't mimic the sprawling grids of the Maya, or the rigid geometric symmetry of Teotihuacan up in the highlands. The classic Veracruz urban form follows its own logic, adapted to its environment. To its cultural vision, it's a unique architectural language spoken in earth and stone. These cities weren't isolated. The scans show the connective tissue. Causeways and pathways linking these urban centers to each other, to the broader landscape. This was a region built on connection. The Gulf Coast was a natural crossroads, a vibrant interface between the highlands of central Mexico and the resources of the Caribbean Sea. These cities became crucial hubs in extensive trade networks. You imagine the flow: obsidian, jade, feathers coming down from the highlands, salt, cotton, shells, exotic marine goods moving up from the coast. The plazas in these Veracruz cities would have been bustling markets, filled with the languages and goods of a continent. This discovery is filling one of the most significant gaps. For so long, the narrative was dominated by two poles. The majestic Maya of the rainforest to the southeast, and the immense, orderly metropolis of Teotihuacan in the highlands to the west. The Gulf Coast cultures were often a footnote. Seen as peripheral players, mere bridges between the two giants, LiDAR is overturning that. It shows the Gulf Coast wasn't a corridor between powers. It was a power center in its own right, a cradle of urban innovation. It developed a distinctive way of city life suited to its tropical environment and its role as a commercial nexus. That's the true revelation. It highlights the breathtaking diversity of urban forms across Mesoamerica. There was no single blueprint for civilization. In the Highland Valley, they built a single overwhelming metropolis of apartment compounds. In the Maya lowlands, they created networks of garden cities with reservoirs and terraces. And here, on the humid Gulf Coast, they built trading hubs, where the sacred ball game echoed in plazas designed for both ceremony and commerce. Each culture, in its own niche, solved the puzzle of urban life differently. The map of ancient America isn't just getting bigger, it's getting richer, more complex, and far more interesting with every pulse of laser light that returns from the hidden ground. The Bolivian lowlands, the Llanos de Mojos, it's a huge, flooded savanna, hard to farm, hard to move through. For a long time, archaeology saw it as a backwater. A place history just passed by, not a heartland. Then they flew lasers over a site called Cotoca, and that idea of a backwater just vanished. What the LiDAR showed was a fortress. A statement built in earth and water, an immense settlement over 50 hectares completely fortified. Its design was concentric rings, deep moats, huge earthen walls, one inside the other. A city built for defense, built to impress, built to last. Inside those rings, the scans show a planned core, pyramids, broad platforms, all arranged around vast, open plazas. This was the ceremonial heart, the political center of a people called the Khmer culture, a society that, before these laser maps, was basically unknown. Their name comes from a nearby town. It's just a placeholder for a civilization we're only now starting to see. The scale of Cotoca is hard to grasp. Digging those moats, raising those walls and mounds in that environment, that required an organized society, thousands of people. It required leaders who could coordinate labor on a massive scale. It required a shared vision, a vision powerful enough to reshape the land itself into a symbol of community and strength. This forces a re-evaluation. It proves that significant urban power, political power, didn't only arise in the classic fertile valleys or along the big rivers. It could ignite here. In a landscape that modern eyes might see as marginal, the Khmer people weren't waiting for ideas to arrive from the more famous centers. They were innovators. They looked at their challenging world, this wet-dry cycle, and they adapted. They built raised fields. They built canals to feed their population, much like their neighbors to the north. And they crowned that agricultural landscape with places like Cotoca, these fortified ceremonial centers. This was a local solution, a homegrown formula for civilization. Their power wasn't imported, it was cultivated from the soil and the seasons of their own home. Cotoca is a lesson. It tells us the seeds of complexity can sprout anywhere. Anywhere the human imagination finds a way to work with the world, not just conquer it. The map of South American prehistory has a new major capital. One that was waiting there, silent and majestic under the grassy plains, waiting for a new kind of light to tell its story. The scale of a civilization, you measure it by its connections. We know the cities, the terraces, the fortresses, but what held them together? Across the Maya lowlands, from Guatemala through Belize and into Mexico, LiDAR is mapping the ancient highways. The Sakpiab, the white roads, engineered causeways raised above the swampy ground, paved with limestone plaster. They ran straight for distances that are staggering. Some spanned over 70 kilometers, connecting major capitals to their allies, to their resources, to distant kin. These weren't just footpaths worn by travel. They were public works, monuments to connectivity. Building a sakpi that long, that straight, it required surveying skill, a massive labor force, and a political will that extended beyond a single city's walls. It meant two or more polities agreeing to build it, to maintain it, to allow safe passage. That alone changes the narrative. For decades, the story of the classic Maya was written in conflict. We focused on the wars, the captured kings. The rivalry was real. It was part of their world. But the Sakpiob tell another story, a quieter story, a story of integration. They show a civilization that was also woven together by trade, by diplomacy, by shared culture. These roads formed a regional infrastructure. Think of them as the interstate system. They linked economic zones. A road might run from a capital directly to a source of chert for tools, or to the slopes where cacao was grown. They connected major ceremonial centers to smaller, supporting communities. They moved not just goods but people, ideas, news. A messenger could travel much faster on a smooth, raised causeway than through dense undergrowth. Festivals, markets, marriage alliances, all of this was made possible by the network. This infrastructure suggests a level of inter-city cooperation we had underestimated. It points to long periods of stability, of peaceful exchange. When you invest that much collective effort in a road, you are investing in a future of interaction. It represents a shared understanding. That connectivity was a source of strength for all. So the Maya world emerges not as a scattering of isolated, warring forts, but as a vast, decentralized urban system. A network of networks. Each city-state kept its own identity, its autonomy, much like the city-states of ancient Greece, but they were also bound into a larger whole. By these physical and cultural threads, they shared a written language, a calendar, religious concepts, artistic styles, and now we see they shared an infrastructure. The Sakpiob were the physical manifestation of that shared world. They turned a collection of brilliant points of light into a constellation, a recognizable shape. This doesn't erase the reality of conflict, but it balances it. It shows a civilization capable of both competition and profound cooperation. Their genius lay in building not just pyramids, but the lines of communication between them. The true monument was the map, a map we are only now from the sky beginning to fully read. This map isn't just for books, it has a living audience. For indigenous communities now across the Americas, these landscapes the lasers show they aren't lost. They're remembered, the great causeways, the garden cities, the ceremonial rings. These are places talked about in stories passed down, stories of ancestors who shaped the world. And LiDAR, in a way, does a kind of scientific translation for those stories. It gives a physical form to deep memory, a tangible corroboration, and for communities whose histories have been pushed aside, that validation carries weight. It strengthens identity. It can become evidence, too, in legal fights over land rights, over sovereignty. When a satellite image shows the earthworks of your ancestors lying under a modern ranch or a logging zone, that image stops being just data. It becomes a testament, a claim to a legacy right there in the soil, but that power brings a deep responsibility. The ethical ground here is as complex as the archaeological site. Who controls this data? Who gets to interpret it? The story of a discovered city isn't a neutral fact. It's a narrative, and it carries cultural weight, political weight, economic weight. There's a real risk of a new exploitation, where outside researchers or media or tourism, they rush in. They frame these places as mysterious ruins found by technology, while the descendant communities, the ones who never forgot, get sidelined. That turns heritage into a spectacle. It gets divorced from its living context. The shift that's needed is from discovery to partnership. The best use of this technology isn't about finding things for communities. It's about providing tools so communities can explore their own histories on their own terms. That means collaborative projects co-designed from the start. It means training indigenous researchers to use LiDAR themselves. It means the interpretation, the story told about a place, is led by the people for whom that place isn't a ruin. It's a relative, and that changes the whole endeavor. Archaeology stops being an external science of extraction. It becomes a collaborative process, a reclamation. A dialogue. It becomes less about what was lost and more about what has been sustained. The conversation changes. We stop asking, what can this ancient city tell us about how urban life began? We start asking, how does knowing this city exists empower its descendants right now? How does it inform their future? That adds the crucial modern layer to all of this. The story of ancient urban origins isn't locked in the past. It's active. It's alive in the cultural revitalization it can support, in the land it can help protect, in the pride it can help restore. The real revelation from seeing these cities from the sky might be the new pathways it opens, not just for understanding ancient landscapes, but for understanding the enduring connection between people, their history, and their home. The old story was a straight line, a tidy ladder. You'd start with villages, then agriculture gave you towns. Towns became cities, cities became states, then empires. It was presented as a universal stage model, a single path, but what LiDAR is showing us isn't a ladder. It's more like a forest, a sprawling forest where 1,000 different paths were being walked at the same time. The evidence isn't just dots on a map anymore. It's a cumulative weight, and that weight collapses the simple linear idea. We're not seeing one civilization's journey from simple to complex. We're seeing a planet-wide explosion of experiments, all happening at once, each one a unique answer to the same basic question: how do we live together in large numbers in this specific place? In Cambodia, with the seasonal floods, the answer was a low-density hydraulic city, a metropolis that functioned as a machine for managing water. In the Amazon, the answer was the garden city, a dispersed network woven right into the food forest. On the arid coast of Peru, the answer was the fortified citadel, a defensive hub built around precious canals. In the Guatemalan lowlands, it was the interconnected Megalopolis, a whole territory linked by causeways, tens of thousands of structures forming one political fabric. There was no single blueprint, no one right way to build a city that others copied. Success wasn't measured by a universal standard of monumentality or density. Success was sustainability, resilience, how well the urban form solved the local puzzle. Food, water, security, meaning. A society in the rainforest invested its genius in enriching soil, managing biodiversity. Their monument was fertility. A society in the desert invested its genius in capturing and defending every drop of water. Their monument was endurance. A society in seasonal wetlands invested its genius in earthworks that turned flood and drought into an agricultural rhythm. Their monument was harmony. This requires a shift in perspective, a more humble understanding, and a far more interesting one. We have to move from a model of linear stages to one of branching pathways. From a story of progress to a story of adaptation. Civilizational complexity didn't have one origin point, diffusing outward and growing weaker. It had multiple origins. It sparked again and again, in fertile valleys and flooded savannas, in highland basins and dense rainforests. Each spark followed a different pathway. Shaped by its environment, the values of its people, the structure of its society. To look at the engineered landscape of the Bini Savanna and call it less advanced than the stone pyramids of Teotihuacan, that misses the point. It's judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree. Each was a masterpiece of adaptation, a brilliant solution to a different set of problems. The true measure of a civilization isn't how closely it resembles our own or some idealized ancient standard. It's how ingeniously it created a way of life that flourished for centuries in its own unique corner of the world. This pluralistic view doesn't diminish these societies. It liberates them. It lets us see the stunning, creative diversity of the human experiment in building community, and it leads to the next question. If these were the experiments, what were the common threads? What timeless principles of urban life, if any, echo across all these different forms? These cities teach us something deeper than stone. It's about soil and water. Their survival came from a radical idea: the city as an ecosystem. Angkor's reservoirs and canals weren't just engineering, they were applied ecology. Mimicking the natural water cycle, but at the scale of a metropolis. The Khmer engineers understood the rhythm there: flood and drought. Their whole urban plan was a buffer against that volatility. They captured the monsoon's excess, stored it for the dry season. They turned a climatic challenge into a reliable resource. That system sustained a city of over 1 million people. For centuries, its eventual transformation wasn't a single cataclysm. It was likely a slow, cumulative stress on that intricate water network, a lesson in fragility. Even the most brilliant designs over long stretches of time. In the Amazon, the principle was different, but the philosophy was the same. The garden cities of the upper Xingu, the Bini Savannah. They didn't fight the forest or the floodplain. They invited them in. They became partners. By creating terra preta soils, they didn't just farm the land. They improved it generation after generation. Their raised fields, their fish weirs, these were technologies for intensifying nature's bounty, not replacing it. The city was the garden was the city. This wasn't a low-impact lifestyle. It was a high-intelligence one. They managed biodiversity, curated useful trees, engineered the hydrology to create a productive, sustainable landscape. Their monument was a fertile, living system. It could support large, settled populations for over 1,000 years. Their collapse, when it came, was likely less about environmental failure, more about the societal rupture brought by external forces they could not engineer for. Contrast that with places like the Moche valleys. There, urban design was a direct defensive response, a harsher equation. Water was scarce, competition was fierce. Their cities were placed on ridges behind walls, protecting the life-giving canals below. Their sustainability was about control, defense of a precious, limited resource. When that control was lost due to climatic shifts, social upheaval, the urban system could falter relatively quickly. So you have these models: the hydraulic symbiosis of Angkor, the agro-ecological partnership of the Amazon, the defensive resource control of the Moche, each a different strategy for urban endurance, their success, their vulnerability. It teaches us there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The key is alignment. How well does the city's design align with the realities, the rhythms of its specific environment? That's the critical insight for our own century. We face urban challenges of unprecedented scale: water scarcity, flooding, heat islands, loss of biodiversity. Modern cities have often been built on a principle of separation. We pave over watersheds. We channel rivers into concrete culverts. We see nature as something to be kept outside. Managed, subdued, the LiDAR-revealed cities suggest a different path. They prove long-term urban resilience is rooted in integration, designing cities that function like forests, that manage water like wetlands, that build soil health as a public utility. What if our infrastructure looked less like gray concrete and more like Khmer canals? Or Amazonian dark earth? What if we designed neighborhoods to capture and store rainwater, to cool the air, to produce food? Our ancestors didn't have our technology, but they possessed a deep, place-based intelligence. They understood a city's true foundation isn't its concrete or steel. It's the health of the water, the soil, the life that flows through it. Their legacy, now visible from the air, is a whisper from the past, a reminder. The most advanced urban planning might not be about building higher. It might be about weaving our homes more thoughtfully into the living world. The blueprint for a sustainable urban future may have been written centuries ago, hidden in the quiet geometry of an overgrown canal or the rich, dark soil of a forgotten garden. Those earthworks are immense. They're a testament to collective will, to move that much soil, to reshape entire valleys that required more than a king's command. It required a shared purpose. LiDAR data gives us a paradox of scale. We see these monumental transformations of the landscape, projects that would challenge modern machinery. And we ask, how was this done? Who told them to do it? The old answer was often simple. A powerful ruler, a god-king commanding an army of laborers, a top-down model of coercion. But the patterns on the ground whisper a more complex story. The causeways of the Maya lowlands, the geometric earthworks of the Amazon, these features often link communities. They don't just serve a single central palace, they form networks, they integrate whole regions. That suggests the benefits were widely shared. A road connecting your village to a larger center meant access to markets, to marriage partners, to ceremonial life. The incentive to build it was communal. The labor might have been organized through kinship ties, through rotating civic duty. As part of a religious festival, it could have been social glue, a way to build community identity through shared work. The evidence pushes us toward what scholars call heterarchy. It's not a simple hierarchy with one person at the top. It's a system where power flows through multiple channels, through elders, through skilled engineers, through religious leaders, through guilds of craftspeople. Leadership might have been situational. A master water builder would direct a canal project. A war leader would organize defense. A priest would oversee temple construction. Authority was distributed based on knowledge and context. This doesn't mean these were utopian societies, but it means their social contract was more nuanced than we thought. Mobilizing thousands to dig a reservoir for generations, that isn't sustainable through force alone. It requires a belief that the work serves a greater good, that your effort contributes to the well-being of your family, your descendants. It requires a profound social cohesion. We see this in the design of some cities. The low-density garden city model of the Amazon anchors dispersed neighborhoods. They imply a different relationship between people and planners. A society where daily life had autonomy, a connection to the land, while still being part of a grand collective vision. The city wasn't just imposed. It was grown through countless individual and community decisions, guided by a shared cultural blueprint. LiDAR reveals the sheer geographic spread of these projects. And it's forcing archaeology to ask better questions, moving beyond the old dichotomy. The choice isn't just between egalitarian tribes and despotic states. There's a vast middle ground of sophisticated social models based on collective action, on reciprocal obligation, on a deep-seated cultural agreement about how to live together, how to shape a common world. The true monument, then, might not be the pyramid or the canal. It might be the invisible social machinery that made them possible. The unspoken agreements, the shared calendars of work and festival, the passing down of engineering knowledge from one generation to the next. The lasers show us the physical footprint of a civilization. But within that footprint, we must now learn to see the outline of its society. A society capable of moving mountains, not because it was commanded, but because it believed in the mountain it was building together. This revolution is just getting started. The discoveries we've talked about, the cities coming out of the jungle, they feel huge, and they are, but they're also just the first few pages. We've only just opened the book. The LiDAR revolution is accelerating. The technology itself is changing. Sensors are getting smaller, more powerful, and a lot cheaper. What used to need a government grant and a special plane can now be done with a drone. A small university team can do it, even a community project. That's a profound shift. It means the map of our ancient past is about to be filled in at a pace we can barely imagine. The coverage will become almost total. Every forest, every savanna, every remote mountain valley that's kept its secrets will eventually be surveyed from the air. The flood of new data will be constant. It will be overwhelming. It will almost certainly dwarf everything we've found so far. We're standing at the edge of a vast, unexplored digital continent. And the applications are branching into new areas. Researchers are already adapting LiDAR for underwater use. Bathymetric LiDAR uses a green laser that can go through water, mapping the seafloor and riverbeds. That opens a new frontier, the search for settlements that are submerged now. Sea levels have risen since the last ice age. Countless coastal sites are under the waves now. Port cities, early fishing villages, entire landscapes that were dry land 10,000 years ago. This technology could find them, reveal their layouts without anyone ever diving down. On land, the resolution is getting finer. We can move from mapping a whole city to mapping a single building in incredible detail. Ultra-high-resolution scans of known sites, like the Great Pyramid or the Parthenon, could show subtle things. Construction phases, repairs, alterations you can't see with your eyes. It would be like giving archaeologists a microscopic view of history's largest structures. And that brings the next great challenge. It won't be about finding the data anymore. It will be about understanding it. We're entering the age of big data for the past. Managing petabytes of laser point information, developing artificial intelligence to automatically spot patterns, a causeway here, a potential house platform there. The human mind can't process it all. The future archaeologist will be as much a data scientist as a field excavator, using algorithms to sift through digital landscapes for the stories they contain. Maybe the most exciting change is about access. This technology is democratizing discovery. A researcher in a country with limited funding for big digs can now make a world-class discovery from a laptop. By analyzing publicly available satellite LiDAR data or flying a modest drone, indigenous communities can use it to document and protect their ancestral lands. Gathering evidence that's both culturally vital and scientifically solid, the story of the human past is being taken back by a much wider group of storytellers. The promise is a future of exploration that's digital, comprehensive, and endlessly surprising. The next century won't be one of occasional, dramatic finds. It will be a continuous process of rewriting. Each new scan will add another sentence, another chapter, to a global story we're only beginning to read. The ground beneath our feet, it turns out, isn't silent. It's been waiting patiently for us to learn how to listen, and now we finally have the ears to hear. The forest we walk through isn't a museum, it's a garden with a very long memory, and that's the quiet, seismic shift LiDAR brings. For centuries, explorers, settlers, scientists, they looked at the Amazon, the Maya forest, all that vastness. They saw a primal wilderness, a world untouched, a green wall that had always been there. That idea, the pristine wilderness, it became a powerful myth. It shaped policies, it inspired conservation, and it erased entire chapters of human history. LiDAR has torn that myth to pieces. The lasers show us these landscapes weren't wild. They were home, they were managed, they were designed. You see the evidence in the shape of the land itself. Those geometric earthworks in the Amazon, the causeways, the raised fields, they're not scars. They're fingerprints of a long-term partnership. These societies practiced what we'd now call agroforestry. They didn't clear-cut the jungle. They curated it. They planted useful trees, fruit trees, nut trees, palms for thatch and fiber. They enriched the soil with terra preta, creating islands of fertility that last for centuries. They used controlled, low-intensity burns to clear underbrush, recycle nutrients, encourage certain plants. This wasn't exploitation, it was cultivation. So subtle, so sophisticated that to an untrained eye, it just looked like nature. The biodiversity we marvel at today, that stunning variety, it may not be in spite of human presence. It may be because of it. By creating a mosaic open gardens, managed forest, enriched soils, water features, they increased the ecological niches. They shaped an environment that supported more life, not less. The forest we see isn't the forest before humans. It's the forest that grew with them and then continued after their societies changed. It's a living legacy. This rewrites ecological history from the ground up. It means our baseline for what's natural is wrong. When we try to preserve a patch of rainforest by fencing it off, keeping people out, we might be preserving a landscape that was actively maintained by people for millennia. We're managing a garden as if it were a wilderness, and that approach can miss the point. It can even be harmful. It severs the connection between indigenous communities and their ancestral lands. Lands they are often the best stewards of. The implication for conservation is profound. It argues for a partnership model, one that recognizes the deep historical human influence and seeks to integrate that wisdom. It means listening to indigenous knowledge, which carries the living memory of how to tend these places. It means seeing humans not as a destructive force to be excluded, but as a potential keystone species. A species capable of stewardship. The goal shifts from preserving a static, imagined past to fostering a resilient, living system, one that acknowledges people as part of the ecological equation. Just as they have been for thousands of years, so the next time you see a dense green canopy, remember, you might be looking at the world's oldest orchard. A testament not to nature left alone, but to an ancient collaboration. The greatest discovery LiDAR offers may not be a lost city, it may be a lost truth. That the line between the natural world and the human world is, and always has been, beautifully blurred. A civilization's end tells you more than its beginning. For a long time, all we had were the ruins, a broken monument, an empty plaza, a layer of ash. That was the final scene, but the rest of the story was missing. How big was this society, really? How did its systems start to come apart? LiDAR changes that. It gives us the middle of the story, because it shows the city as a complete, living system. Not just ruins, and that lets us see how it changed. We can see where the machine stopped. Take Angkor. The lasers mapped its entire water system. The canals, the reservoirs, the whole network that kept the city alive. So now archaeologists can ask different questions, not just when it ended, but how. The data shows that in the later years, maintaining that system started to fail. Canals filled with silt, smaller channels got blocked or used for something else. That big, connected network began to break into smaller, separate pieces. The city didn't disappear overnight, it shrank. People probably left the center, moved to places where water was easier to manage. The failure was slow. It was the unraveling of the very engineering that built the empire, a society trying to keep up with its own creation, a creation that had become fragile. In the Maya lowlands, it's a similar pattern, but different. LiDAR shows the full scale of the terraced farms and the roads connecting everything. At a place like Caracol, you see the whole machine. The farms, the society. Earlier theories looked for one cause, a big drought, constant war, but this wider view makes it more complicated. It shows a landscape under real pressure. Those terraces and reservoirs were a huge investment. They fed a huge population, but systems like that need constant, organized upkeep. If the society weakened, if they couldn't organize that labor anymore, the maintenance would slip. A terrace wall fails, a canal silts up, food production in that area drops, people move, and those long white roads, that network, might have started carrying conflict instead of trade. Retreat instead of unity. This gets us past simple cause and effect. It points to something else, a kind of stress between the society and its environment. These cities weren't just people and buildings, they were agreements, an agreement written in canals and terraces. The Khmer agreement was with the monsoon. The Maya agreement was with the thin soil, and for centuries those agreements held, but they were a balance. LiDAR lets us see the terms, the incredible effort it took to keep it going. And it lets us see where it could fail. What if the climate shifts and the water system needs even more? What if the population grows faster than the engineered land can handle? What if political trouble breaks the contract that keeps the repair crews working? So collapse is rarely an event. It's a process, a complex system becoming too complex to sustain. The finely tuned machine gets stressed and it starts to simplify. The urban network contracts. People fall back on local ways of living, ways that are more resilient. The grand vision fades and the forest comes back, not as an invader, just as a witness. There's a quiet lesson in that for us. We live in cities of amazing complexity. Our agreements are with power grids, with supply chains, with digital networks. We've also built brilliant, intricate systems. This view of the past asks us to look at our own foundations. Where is our stress? What maintenance are we putting off? The story of ancient urban life isn't just about origins. It's a long, slow conversation about what can be sustained. And now, for the first time, we can hear that whole conversation. From the first line they surveyed to the last canal that grew over. The laser map is a landscape of questions. Every line, every mound, it's a riddle. LiDAR gives you the skeleton of a lost world, but not its soul. It shows you the shape of a city carved in light. But it doesn't give you the sounds, the smells, the prayers. The technology is good. It's phenomenally good at finding the where and the what. A structure is here. A road goes there, but the other questions, the who, the why, the when, those stay in the dark. A perfect mound on the screen could be a palace or a granary. A long causeway could be a sacred route or a military road. It might be both at different times. The data can't tell a temple platform from a refuse heap. It gives you a breathtaking artifact, a map of silence, and that's where the old work begins again. The slow work. LiDAR doesn't replace the trowel, it guides it. An archaeologist looks at that digital landscape and chooses. That cluster by the reservoir, dig a test pit there. That isolated structure, see what ceramics turn up. The map becomes a blueprint for asking the ground-specific questions. Through excavation, you recover charcoal. You can date it, pin a structure to a century. You analyze pottery styles which change like fashion. You look for pollen in the soil to rebuild the environment. Was this a garden, a plaza? Each method is a way of giving voice to the map. Translating geometry back into experience. It's a partnership. The airborne laser gives the grand view. The person on the ground provides the intimate details. One shows the scale, the other works to understand the heartbeat, and even this eye has blind spots. LiDAR struggles with dense, wet clay. In steep terrain, deep canyons, the beams can miss things. Create shadows. It's not a magic wand. It's a filter, a specific kind of vision. It excels in some places and is limited in others. There will always be places where the past keeps its secrets. Hidden in the dirt, waiting. This partnership defines the new exploration. The revelation isn't a perfect tool. It's a better way to ask questions. LiDAR hands archaeologists a list of mysteries they never knew were there. And then it's up to human curiosity, patience, to solve them, to move from seeing a city to understanding the people who lived there. That final translation from data back into story, that's an art. And it remains fundamentally a human one. The map isn't regional anymore, it's planetary. We have this dataset now for the first time that covers continents. A library of ancient city plans written in laser light. It's a quiet beginning, a revolution in how we understand. Scholars can put the precise street grid of Mahendraparvata right next to the sprawling water network of Angkor. They can compare the causeway webs from the Maya lowlands with the geometric earthworks in the Amazon, all on the same scale, all in the same digital language. This isn't just adding more dots to a map, it's asking the map to speak, to show us patterns we could never see before. So the fundamental questions come into play. Are there universal principles for urban design, a kind of deep grammar all human societies use when they build together? Or is every city a unique answer, shaped completely by its own environment? The new evidence suggests the truth is in the conversation between the two. Look at the street. In very different places, under different skies, you see a recurring idea. The straight line, the causeway, the ceremonial avenue, from the white roads of the Maya to the grand processional ways of Angkor, humans have repeatedly chosen to impose geometric order on the land. It seems to be a near-universal act, a declaration of human intention against the randomness of nature. It creates clarity, it creates direction, a shared axis for community life. But then you look at what that line connects. In the seasonal wetlands of Cambodia, those straight lines are canals. They're arteries in a vast water management system. In the rainforest, they're raised causeways. They keep feet dry and link dispersed garden communities. In the desert foothills, they might be defensive walls. The principle, the straight, organizing line, is similar, but the function is utterly dictated by the local need: water, connectivity, defense. This global dataset lets us search for these patterns. In how humans solve the core puzzles of living together. How do you move people and goods? How do you distribute a precious resource like water to thousands of households? How do you create spaces for ceremony, for commerce, for governance? The answers from Cambodia, from Guatemala, from the Amazon, they form a catalogue. A catalogue of human ingenuity. We can see that low-density urbanism with homes spread across a managed landscape that wasn't a Maya peculiarity. It wasn't an Amazonian oddity. It was a widespread solution, a highly successful solution for sustaining large populations in tropical environments, and it appears independently across the world. This comparative work does something profound. It begins to construct a truly global history of urbanism. For centuries, the canon of ancient cities was a familiar list. Rome, Athens, Egypt, Mesopotamia, these were the models, the benchmarks. Innovations from other parts of the world were often framed as derivatives or curiosities. The LiDAR evidence demolishes that hierarchy. It shows that the Khmer hydraulic metropolis, the Maya garden cities, the Amazonian earthwork complexes, these weren't peripheral footnotes. They were parallel triumphs. They represent independent, sophisticated lineages of urban thought. They evolved in dialogue with their own environments, not as echoes from a Mediterranean core. This levels the playing field of history. It gives equal weight to the innovations of the global South. It recognizes that the human drive to build complex, sustainable communities sparked in countless hearts. So the search for patterns isn't about finding who did it first or who did it best. It's about compiling the full repertoire of human solutions, understanding the full spectrum of possibility for how we can live on this planet. The next chapter won't be written by finding a single lost city. It will be written by connecting them all, seeing the dazzling, global tapestry of urban life for the very first time. The most powerful map is one you can walk through. LiDAR data isn't just coordinates, it's a portal, a three-dimensional world rendered in detail. You can fly over it on a screen. You can swoop down a Maya causeway, glide over the geometric earthworks of the Amazon, circle the vast reservoirs of Angkor. That visual power changes everything. For a century, archaeology relied on artists' reconstructions or static site plans. Now, anyone with an internet connection can explore these lost cities. They can experience the scale, the layout, the genius of the design firsthand. It's more than a cool video, it's a bridge. It connects the specialist's data to the public's curiosity. Words alone couldn't do that. That fly-through video isn't just entertainment. It's public engagement on a global scale. It makes the invisible visible. And when something becomes visible, it becomes real. It becomes worth caring about. Museums are already doing this. You walk into an exhibit now, you might stand before a massive screen. A digital model of a city built from millions of laser points rotates before you. You see the city as it was, not as a crumbling ruin, but as a complete, functioning place. You can toggle layers, see the landscape without trees, see the water systems light up. That interactive experience turns visitors from passive observers into active explorers. They're not just being told about the past, they're being given the tools to see it for themselves, to ask their own questions. Why is that road so straight? Why is the temple placed just there? It fosters a deeper connection. The past stops being a distant fact. It becomes a landscape to be discovered, a puzzle to be solved. This democratization is just beginning. The next frontier might be citizen science. The amount of LiDAR data being collected is staggering, more than any single team of archaeologists could ever analyze. Imagine a platform like the ones used to classify galaxies, but instead, volunteers from around the world log on. They're given small tiles of a LiDAR map. Their task is to look for straight lines, circular shapes, rectangular platforms to flag potential features for the experts. The public could become part of the discovery process. A retired teacher in Oslo, a student in Tokyo, a farmer in Brazil, all could help find the next lost city. That does more than accelerate research. It builds a global community of stewards for the past. When you help find something, you feel invested in its story. You become an advocate for its protection. You develop a stake in our shared human heritage. This shift transforms archaeology from an exclusive science into a collaborative journey. The thrill of discovery, once reserved for the few in remote jungles, is now shareable with millions. It builds a broader base of support for the difficult, expensive work of preservation. When people feel connected to these places, they understand why they matter. They see them not as irrelevant ruins, but as chapters in our collective story. Chapters about ingenuity, adaptation, resilience. The laser's gift isn't just to the scholar. It's to every curious mind. It hands each of us a key to a hidden world, inviting us all to step inside and explore. A map can be dangerous. For every researcher who finds a digital city to be a revelation, there's someone else who might see it as an inventory. A list of things to take. That's the double edge of this LiDAR revolution. The same tool that lets us see these places for the first time with such clarity can also guide others to them. With the wrong intentions, a high-resolution map of a lost city is in the wrong hands a perfect treasure map. It shows where the temple platforms are, where the elite residences might be, where undisturbed artifacts could lie. The ethical landscape has shifted as dramatically as the physical one. The responsibility now isn't just to discover, but to protect. And that forces a complete rethinking of how archaeology shares its work. In the past, you might keep the location of a sensitive site vague in publications to deter looters, but a LiDAR dataset is precise geography. Releasing it openly without safeguards could lead to irreparable harm, so new protocols are emerging. Data might be held in secure repositories, access controlled, shared only with verified researchers under strict agreements, or the most sensitive locational data might be blurred, withheld from public releases until protective measures are in place on the ground. But the solution can't be digital alone. It requires boots on the ground. A stronger, more immediate partnership with the communities who live near these sites, with local heritage authorities, because the first, best line of defense is often the people for whom this landscape is home. When local communities are engaged as partners from the start, when they understand the cultural significance of what the lasers have revealed, they become the most effective guardians. They have a vested interest in protecting their own heritage from outside exploitation. It shifts the model from external extraction to community-based stewardship. And this challenge prompts an even more profound question. In an age where we can record a site in photorealistic, three-dimensional detail without ever touching it, what is the purpose of physical excavation? The answer is leading toward a principle of minimal disturbance, a concept often called digital preservation. The idea is to use LiDAR, combined with ground-based laser scanning and photogrammetry, to create a perfect, immortal digital twin of a site. Every stone, every contour captured forever, this record becomes a primary research tool. Scholars can measure, they can analyze, they can even virtually excavate layers from their computers. It allows for endless hypothesis testing without a single trowel breaking the soil. So physical excavation becomes a last resort, a targeted surgical intervention. Used only to answer specific questions the digital record cannot resolve, to retrieve materials for dating, to understand construction techniques. This approach treats the archaeological site not as a resource to be mined for data, but as a non-renewable cultural asset to be conserved. The priority becomes preservation in situ, leaving as much as possible undisturbed for future generations, who will have even better tools and questions. This is the monumental responsibility that comes with the laser's gaze. The technology grants a God's eye view, but with that perspective comes a profound duty of care. We are no longer just finders of lost cities. We are their first witnesses in centuries, and what we do next, how we share, how we protect, how we preserve, will determine whether these places survive their own rediscovery. The challenge is no longer simply to see what has been hidden. It is to ensure that seeing it does not become the thing that makes it vanish. The true test of this new age may not be our ingenuity in finding the past, but our wisdom in guarding it. These hidden cities, these sprawling sites, they're not just archaeological finds. They're foundational chapters, they're part of the human story, and they really demand a rewrite. The Maya megalopolis, the Amazonian garden cities, each one challenges our deepest assumptions. They make us reconsider where cities began, how they functioned, why they were built in the first place. The past these lasers reveal, it's not a simple ladder of progress. It's a vibrant tapestry. It's brimming with innovation, with diversity, with a complexity we're only starting to appreciate. This whole journey, from the first laser pulse to the latest digital model, it teaches a profound humility. Our ancestors were master engineers. They were ecologists. They were urban planners. Their achievements, in partnership with their environments, they stand as rivals to our own. They solved problems of water, food, community on a metropolitan scale. With a wisdom we're now scrambling to reclaim, as we face our own urgent challenges, urban and environmental, these rediscovered cities offer more than history. They offer a different kind of wisdom, a library of alternative solutions. They prove civilization isn't a single, narrow path. It's a grand experiment. With many successful forms, the quiet lesson from beneath the canopy, it's one of possibility. If societies could thrive for 1,000 years by weaving their cities into the living forest, or by turning a floodplain into a fertile engine, then our own future isn't limited to the models we have now. It's open to reinvention. These lost worlds remind us the most enduring monuments aren't always made of stone. Sometimes they're made of choices, the choice to cooperate, to adapt, to build in harmony with the world.